Now, dense connective tissues, so it's kind of the flip-flop of those loose connective tissues. So dense connective tissues, instead of having a lot of, like loose connective tissues have a lot of ground substance, again, that fluid-like part, but dense connective tissue, less of that fluid, more of the solid protein fibers. So then you have dense regular connective tissue, dense irregular, and it's interesting. Your book, the OpenStax version, talks about dense elastic and or the regular elastic and irregular elastic. So it's very interesting, but I'll cover them in general. So again, I'm not really worried about this part. We'll cover as we go through the different systems of the body. What I want you to know is more about how it looks like on the histological level. So dense regular connective tissue, you have all of these collagen fibers roughly parallel and very densely packed on each other. So they're very densely packed and parallel. And you do have some fibroblasts and cells in there, but again, they're mostly solid protein fibers. Now, compare that to, so I like to think of it this way. Have you ever had, like, if you had poke, and then what happens eventually, if you have a big bowl of poke, what happens eventually in your molars? At least for me, you kind of get that kind of tough fibrous stuff from the fish, right? Or sometimes we call it suji. But the thing is that this is what we have, that's what you have in your teeth. You actually have the dense regular connective tissue from the fish. So again, meat is muscle. So then this is the dense regular connective tissue of that fish getting stuck in your teeth. Now there's something called tendons. We'll cover that more in detail on exam 2, but you should know for now. So tendons attach muscles to bones and ligaments attach bones to bones or they attach organs. So this is a nice mnemonic as a previous student taught me, is that what is this? What do you call this type of state? It's a T-bone, right? And what do you have in a T-bone? You have a bone connected to muscles. And what starts with T? Tendons. So remember, tendons attach muscles to bone. Ligaments are attached bone to bones. There's still both types of dense regular connective tissue. They have a lot of collagen, but it depends what are they attaching to each other. And then aponeuroses, compared to that, these are more like flat sheets rather than being those thread-like tendons or ligaments. But we'll cover that. So then we're now on the dense irregular connective tissue. And what do we have here? We still have collagen fibers, but notice that compared to the previous dense regular connective tissue, now they're kind of like forming these crisscrosses. And the parts that look like little beads, it's not so much like that they're like little blobs of collagen. So if I took like, these were like collagen fibers and I pointed them toward you, they kind of look like little beads, right? So this is what's happening. So not only do you have, it's no longer like this, you actually have like collagen fibers forming this all different ways in a 3D manner. So the thing is that this is dense irregular because these collagen fiber bundles are no longer tightly packed, and now they're kind of like interwoven in this kind of relatively disorganized manner. So this is the difference between dense irregular and dense regular. It's just, they have collagen, it's just how it's arranged. So it's interwoven networks, layered in skin. And actually this one, don't worry too much. We'll cover this more in chapter 6, I believe. That's on exam 2. All right, so out of V overall, what's the difference between dense regular and dense irregular? Dense regular, tightly packed and parallel. Dense irregular, a little less packed. And you notice that they're not parallel. It's all interwoven and crisscrossing. And elastic tissue. So again, from the histological, it kind of looks like dense, regular connective tissue, right, with the collagen. But this is where it's different. It's not collagen, it's elastic fibers. Do they contain the elastic fibers, these proteins called elastins? So instead of having collagen, collagen is very strong, but it's not very flexible. Whereas elastic tissue and elastin is actually pretty strong. Not as strong as collagen, but a lot more flexible and stretchy. And that's pretty much the difference between elastic tissue and the dense, regular, and irregular connective tissue. Okay, fluid connective tissue will end on this. I know we're almost out of time. So things like blood and lymph, you know what blood is. But yes, blood is a connective tissue. And you may be like, wait, what? So the blood that runs, how is that connected to each other? So the thing is that it's a water matrix of dissolved proteins. So instead of having solid, this is where fluid connective tissue is like connective tissue with a little asterisk. It's got its own little spin. It's a little special. So instead of having solid protein fibers, you can think of it as having dissolved water-soluble protein fibers. So that means these protein fibers can be carried and dissolve easily in water. And they carry specific cell types. So just like how the fibroblasts, the adipocytes, and all the other connective tissue proper cells have specializations, you also have specialized cells in fluid connective tissues. So collectively they're called formed elements, but there are three broad categories: red blood cells, white blood cells, and there are actually many subtypes, so don't worry too much about the subtypes. Maybe macrophages, but don't worry about like all the other types for now. I think that we cover that more in detail in PHYL 142. And platelets. These are the three broad categories. All of the cells in blood fall into one of these three categories. So what's the extracellular matrix of blood? So remember, I told you that extracellular matrix is solid extracellular protein fibers and then ground substance. The thing about extracellular matrix is that, again, for fluid connective tissue, it's very special. So instead of being solid, it's not solid. We actually have our fluid extracellular protein fibers. So they're still proteins, but instead of forming rigid structures that don't dissolve and wash away with water, now these proteins are able to float around in the blood itself. So instead of protein fibers, it's more just about extracellular proteins that can be secreted, but instead of forming a network, it just dissolves easily in the watery matrix of blood and is carried along easily in blood. So it's mostly ground substance and these extracellular proteins. So plasma is what we call the extracellular matrix of blood. So it's a mixture of proteins, chemicals, water, but it's pretty much everything that isn't the cells of blood or isn't blood cells. So remember those red cells, white blood cells, and those platelets. So what we have or in the clinic, when you draw a blood sample, well, you have blood, but what do they often do, especially if they're trying to do a transfusion or collect the blood for blood transfusion? Often they spin it down in what we call a centrifuge, and it separates into the cells on the bottom, and this liquid on the top is this kind of pale yellow liquid. So that plasma is what you call that pale yellow liquid. All the cells settle on the bottom, but the part that's left over, the liquid part, that's again everything that's not the cells. So plasma is the extracellular matrix of blood. So again, extracellular matrix is protein fibers plus some sort of ground substance, but in blood it's special. It's fluid extracellular proteins, and instead of being fibers, they're more like just like extracellular proteins that easily dissolve in water. So again, emphasizing plasma is the extracellular matrix of blood. Now, plasma proteins, they're not going to have, this is another reason why fluid connective tissues are a little asterisk. They are connective tissues, but they're special. They don't have collagen or elastin because that would form solid networks and kind of clog up things. It would be like having hair in your pipes. Now, what they have is special types of proteins like albumins. You covered this more in depth in PHYL 142. These are very important actually in the ability of your blood to hold on to water and retain water. So this is the most common type of protein you find. Of all the proteins you find in plasma, this is the most common type of protein. It's also important in transporting some chemicals. The cool thing about albumins is that they can actually take hydrophobic compounds and drugs and transport them and allow them to piggyback and flow through the blood. And also more about oncotic pressure. This sounds like osmosis, right? But don't worry about it for now. We'll cover this more in PHYL 142. But albumins are very important proteins. Globulins, these include those antibodies you hear on the news so often. So again, you have a lot of protein in blood. It's not just cells. There's also transport globulins as well. And then fibrinogen and clotting factors. Again, this is something more for PHYL 142. But what I'm getting at is that your blood is not just water and cells. You actually have all these proteins and other chemicals that help in the functioning of blood. And then supportive connective tissue. Remember I mentioned earlier that there's cartilage and bone, but we're running out of time before the first exam. So cartilage, I'm going to shift to and delay until exam 2. So probably our first lecture after exam 1 will be on cartilage. And so again, cartilage and bone. All right, so I think we're out of time. Um, if you have somewhere else to go, you can go to wherever. But if you want to do a few top hat questions to review, we can do that as well. Which of these is not an immune cell? Okay, let's see how everyone did. Okay, most of you said melanocytes, and most of you are correct. So macrophages and mast cells, they are immune cells. Now, macrophages, those are the big eaters. Mast cells, they're actually very important in allergies and whatnot, but again, don't worry too much about now. Like, again, we have immunology coming up next semester. Next question. Okay, let's see how everybody did. So most of you said areolar, and most of you are correct. So think about reticular, you have all those collagen fibers, so we can eliminate that. Now, adipose tissue, it is a loose connective tissue, but areolar, if you look at that picture, you have all of these very loose networks of protein fibers, but not too many cells. So even though adipose tissue doesn't have a lot of protein fibers, it's really jam-packed with those fat cells. So that's why areolar, again, is the one that has the most ground substance, is most fluid-like. It does have some proteins to support, but it is the least dense of all the connective tissue, or actually least dense of the connective tissue proper. And then I think I have one more question. Okay, let's see how everyone did. And it's all near unanimous. So actually, yay, everyone got it correct. I'm so stoked. Okay, so yes, ending on a good note. So I'll see everyone on Friday. Again, no office hours today. I have yet another Zoom University meeting to go to. But yeah, so I see everyone on Friday. Take care. Stay healthy until then. All right. See you then.